Good evening, everyone. My name is Hans Visser. I'm the Biodiversity Officer with Fingal County Council. And I suppose today is an information session on the Biodiversity Makeover project. It's a new initiative that we recently started where we're hoping to increase the biodiversity value of urban areas in our county. So today, like it's very much just to kind of give people an idea what the biodiversity makeover is all about. So like the idea, I suppose, we'll kind of be looking at a couple of different things, but I want to start with, I suppose, describing the environmental changes that occur when, I suppose, we develop a housing estate. So I suppose it's going back to the beginning before the housing estate was there to kind of just briefly explain the environmental changes that happen. And I suppose where we started, like a lot of Fingal is basically either tillage land or grasslands, and usually bound by hedgerows. And then as houses get developed, it changes into a housing estate with sort of hard surfaces, houses, and then usually the remnants of hedges are usually incorporated in a new housing estate. Now, as that happens, I suppose species that kind of used to kind of wandering around the countryside like hedgehogs now suddenly I suppose there's roads and that kind of can form barriers for them that they may not survive. The areas will be lit up. So again, like that's for in terms for night flying creatures like bats and owls, that's slightly problematic. And I suppose we kind of manicure sort of our open spaces that it all looks neat and tidy. Predators increase, or like you have the number of cats and dogs that increases in the estate as well. That all has an impact too. And aside from that, we also add an awful lot more chemicals, whether it's indeed to kind of to spray around the base of the trees to make it look tidy, whether in our own gardens, whether we use slug pellets, for example. And even when you go to the supermarket, the plethora of pesticides that you can buy for use in the garden is phenomenal. And then similarly, even simple things like the flea products that you spray on your dog. They found out recently as well that if that's because birds will line their nest with the hairs of the dogs, and like when chicks, because they're born without any feathers on them, but when the bare skin gets in touch with these hairs that have the I suppose the pesticide on it that is used on the dog, it actually absorbed and the chicks actually die. So these are all real challenges for wildlife in urban areas. So it's not easy for those species to survive. And in a way, what happens then, where you see sort of a typical group of species that you find in a countryside setting, such as yellowhammers or tree sparrows, partridges and badgers, bats, various butterflies, they all, I suppose, they disappear, and then I suppose a more generic group of species takes over. Where there's the blackbirds and robins and magpies, there's still bats there. There's foxes there. You have urban foxes and a sort of a different range of butterflies at the same time. So, like housing estates, I suppose, do carry a completely different group of animals that you would normally that I suppose that you don't actually see anywhere else. So all the really rare stuff that's in the countryside tends to disappear, and the more resilient species tend to survive. So I suppose so, like what we're trying to do now is just we wanted to see like, well, what can we do for biodiversity in urban areas, in particular sort of existing estates. Like we're also kind of looking at new estates, developing guidance there for developers to see what we can do for to kind of make new estates so it's more biodiversity friendly from the start. But in this case, we're trying to see to retrofit measures in to kind of make housing estates more biodiversity friendly. But I suppose we don't necessarily always know how to do that. So what the biodiversity makeover initiative is about is to actually test it on a slightly larger scale in tree housing estates. Now, I suppose for some, like this is sort of a fairly standard open space, which is mown grass and trees, and that's about the extent of what you find in an open space. Now, a biodiversity makeover is not rewilding. So to kind of let nature do its own thing, and this is sort of an example of what your same estate basically would look like in 20 years' time. Similarly, like I suppose it's not our intention to kind of plant woodland on the whole estate, but the whole idea, I suppose, is more just to create sort of an ecosystem. And I suppose if we want the birds, they need the insects, and if you want the insects, you need the flowers. So it's kind of a whole ecosystem approach to kind of start at the base. If we can kind of create more space to get more flowers into an estate, that like should then lead to more insects, which then should lead to more bats or birds and bats, and possibly even birds of prey. So it's kind of very important that you need all these elements, I suppose, to make that work. And you also need to consider the life cycle. So just putting up a nest box, for example, for a house sparrow, if you don't have a hedgerow where they can sort of shelter in when they're not in the breeding season, or if you have no water for them to drink, or if there's no insects for their chicks or no seed for the adults, then those species would not be there. So what we try to do with these makeovers is trying to kind of look at some of the key target species such as house sparrows, and can all these different elements basically be incorporated in a housing estate to ensure that all the habitat requirements of those species are met. Now, what sort of measures are we kind of looking at? Now, meadows would be an obvious one. And I suppose, like, again, the whole idea is that, like with the meadows, it's kind of allowing the existing grass to grow, and then seeing some of the things that come up, and I suppose if necessary, supplemented with either the sowing of new species or actually planting of new species. But often what you actually find, if you just let the grass grow, there's actually stuff there in the soil already that can come up, and in a way provides for that extra biodiversity basically straight away as well. Meadows like this, again, you cut them once a year in September, but at the same time, you have little kickabout areas. So the whole idea is to kind of allow for, like, it's kind of looking at the existing open space, how that's being used. Is where the kids are playing on a regular basis, it will be mown as normal, but it's kind of looking for opportunities where can we allow the grass to grow and have the known pathways through that, for example. So again, these are the things where to kind of get more flowers. Hopefully that will lead to more insects, and again that will be better than for the bats and the birds, for example, as well. We're looking at sort of phase mowing, so it's basically not doing everything at the same time, because the whole idea, I suppose, it's you can kind of cut everything, but any winter cover, for example, for some of the butterflies that we have, they overwinter sort of in tussocky grass, similarly with beetles and spiders. So the whole idea is that we're going to leave some of the ranker grass like in the winter to allow those species to survive as well. And otherwise, like we basically like getting a farmer in with I suppose with either who takes the hay or the silage out of the estate, and it basically just means it's trying to run down some of the nutrient levels, and that helps to increase sort of the floristic diversity. So you get more flowers that way, particularly if you do that on over a number of years. Now, might be also opportunities for seasonal grazing, so like that you kind of get livestock there in the wintertime. Again, unusual in Fingal or unusual in Ireland, but certainly on the continent, this is actually a lot more common. These might be options, for example, that we could be looking at. Similarly, like there might be existing hedgerows already, might be existing scrub already, to kind of see, well, what can we do to kind of enhance that, or there might be opportunities to plant new material in there, so that to plant new hedgerows, to plant new small pockets of scrub. And again, the whole idea, because this is where a lot of the bird life will be in this type of cover. Like the lollipop trees, like look very pretty, but it's very hard for birds to find sufficient cover in there before they could be picked off by magpies, for example. So the whole idea is to kind of create some of the denser cover. And similarly, like if we have big trees, I suppose that's fantastic to start with those. And where there's no small trees, that you kind of say, okay, well, we kind of cater for potential extra tree planting, for example. We looking like there might be options for the incorporation of dead woods. Now, these, I suppose, are like as in log piles or in particular, like in different type of configurations. But you can also do really artistic things with it, for example, like some of the pictures are here, that you see here, where we can kind of make sort of artistic features of this in an open space. And still you have the deadwood there, because deadwood is actually really important for, again, a lot of insects. They really like, and for fungi as well. So they're kind of sort of important features that we tend to overlook. And it could even be, so we can put like sandy mounds or sandy gravelly mounds, say for ground nesting bees, for example, or even very creative type of structures that are sort of insect friendly and can again attract like a wide range of insects in the estate. Bat-friendly lighting, again, it's a slightly different type of lighting that we would normally be using. That might be an option as well. The planting of nettles and brambles, again, certain the nettles are eaten by the caterpillars of particular butterfly species. So again, having just a small little amounts of it is great to have that around. Similarly with like the brambles, again, like a very good for late there's a lot of late flowers, and that's, so again, it's kind of good for pollinators. But also the berries, for example, can be eaten. But there also might be opportunities for, if we have really tasty blackberries, that might actually be something that people can harvest in their own open space. There might be opportunities for restoring water courses. So like it is, like, I suppose, the deep drains that are there now, where you actually try to kind of change them into more natural streams. Again, major biodiversity benefit to be had as well, that we can experiment with. is there possibility for like little ponds and wetlands? Again, like, this very much depends on the housing estate, and this can either be done, I suppose, within the open space. There might be biodiversity friendly planting, and now this is, I suppose, primarily for gardens where we're kind of looking for this. Because as part of the scheme, like, we will also be offering where private landowners could get a biodiversity makeover of their front garden designed and, I suppose, and installed. I suppose the condition is that the landowner does, or the homeowner does, have to pay 50% of the cost for that. But the whole idea, I suppose, is to kind of allow sort of like almost a cottage garden style planting, but that can attract a lot of wildlife. So again, it's just because this is more maintenance intense, it is more appropriate, I suppose, to have it in the front garden than in the open space. There might be opportunities at people's properties for, like, in terms of rainwater planters. Again, like, these are sort of these are being trialed all over Ireland, so there might be opportunities for this as well. Similarly, there might be opportunities for nest boxes on private property. Again, like, the council would pay for these, and there might also be options where you actually have a little camera in it, so you can actually follow the bird life that occupies those nesting facilities. The whole idea, I suppose, what we want to do, like, there's so many options that are there for wildlife enhancement, and I suppose for us it's really just we're trying to figure out, like, well, how like, what measures are the most effective in an urban area. Like, there's loads of ideas, there's loads of opportunities, but what really works and what does not, and I suppose how much does it actually cost to do all these measures as well, so we can determine the most cost-effective way of enhancing biodiversity in urban areas. Now, the process, I suppose, itself, the idea base is that residents associations are to submit the application, so no third-party groups or individual residents, because we just want to make sure that as an association, as a group of residents, you are happy to participate in this. The deadline for these submissions is the 2nd of May. And then we will be basically assessing the applications the week after that, and then the results will be announced in Biodiversity Week. What I said earlier, like, we'll be selecting 3 housing estates, because that will kind of is sort of doable for us, because this is I suppose there's a fair bit of consultation and work required around this. But the way it basically will work, then once we have selected the winning estates, the idea then is then a landscape architect will be appointed by Fingal County Council, and it will be working with the local residents and ourselves to draw up a design for the open space and, where relevant, the front gardens. And the whole idea, I suppose, is to kind of, like, where residents kind of leading the design on this, so they can indicate, yeah, we're happy with meadows in that location, or we would like some more planting in that location, or there might be scope for a pond in that location. The whole idea, I suppose, it's something that ultimately, as a group, the open space gets designed, and I suppose we also have to look at from our maintenance perspective to make sure that it's doable. And then once the design is approved, the idea then is that we will be undertaking the works in the autumn and winter. So, like, say, for example, with tree planting or other type of works, but that will be done then in the autumn. And then the idea then is that an ecologist will also be appointed. They will sort of undertake baseline studies. So we were kind of looking at, like, at the birds in the estate, bats in the estate, amphibians in the estate, and insects. And you can say of butterflies or bees, spiders, beetles. So again, this is to find out, like, all the measures that were taken, what impact does it have on those species? Like, what species are there now, particularly, I suppose, before we do a lot of the work. It's just to find out what is there now, and say over, say, the next 5 years, so that each year you go back and try to find out exactly, like, well, what species are there now? Are they still the same, or have new species arrived? How rare are they? Are they very common, or actually really unusual species in there? And they're the sort of things we want to find out, and because it also gives us an idea of a timeline, how long it takes for certain species to colonize an area. So if you put up nest boxes for house sparrows, say, and they're not in the estate already, how long does it take for them to colonize the estate, or to colonize those boxes? And that kind of goes for all the different species that we're kind of looking for. And then we hope that local residents can give us a hand with the monitoring, because I suppose where we may be able to kind of put a bed detector in the back garden, and just to see, well, what actually shows up there, or on the WhatsApp group, if people see particular butterflies or even dragonflies or frogs in their garden or in the open space. They can take a picture of it and they can see it like I've spotted this. And it just means, I suppose, we get quite a good idea, because residents live there as a day in, day out. So like they have a really good idea, I suppose, what they can see around there every day. And it just means then we can kind of get a really good idea of the species that are around there. And that will kind of give us a good idea then as well in terms of monitoring what is happening in the estate. Now, in terms of the application process, then, like, there's an online application form. I'll just give the link there. You go in there via the Fingal website or Fingal County Council website, and then you look for Biodiversity Makeover Housing Estates Fingal. The application form, there's not, it's quite a short one. I suppose what we're looking for is like the areas of your housing estate that you kind of would like to nominate for a biodiversity makeover, the type of measures you would like to see implemented in your housing estate. We also want to know if people have consulted with their other local residents already in relation to, so I suppose, participating in this process, because it gives us an idea, I suppose, like, do people, how people feel about it. And it's not that we say arrive on site and then suddenly like we want this but we don't want that, or so. Just it kind of gives us a bit of an idea, I suppose, what sort of opinions are out there in relation to makeovers, and also why you think it would be useful for your housing estate, why it would be so beneficial to get a makeover done on the open space and potentially the front gardens. Now, there is a couple of conditions that apply. Your housing estate has to be in Fingal for us to sponsor this. We're kind of looking to kind of ideally sort of include a range of different enhancements. So we're not just about meadows or stopping spraying with herbicides. The whole idea, I suppose, we're trying to provide a range of habitats to kind of, I suppose, to achieve the most significant biodiversity action or the most biodiversity gain where we can. The project is funded by the council, so there's no fee to the residents association, and like any work that gets done in the open space, it will be funded by the council. As that with the private garden makeovers, that's a 50-50 split, where the council funds half of that and the landowner also funds half of that. Again, we kind of consider any estate really, but council managed estates will be prioritized over private estates, or private estates still maintained by the developer. It's just more because I suppose it's fully under our control, and that's, I suppose, that kind of makes it easier for us to work there. Similarly, the lands owned by schools, businesses, or charities, they're not eligible for a biodiversity makeover, so we would not get involved there. The idea then, we will selecting 3 housing estates in Fingal, and as I said, like we do expect that the residents will have done some sort of consultation with local residents before they apply. Because we do if there's any issues that might occur and like we can't get a design over the line, that the council does reserve the right base to kind of go to another housing estate to give this a go. And as the deadline is the 2nd of May 2025, and applications unfortunately can't be considered anymore after that. So that's definitely the closing date, and then like after that we'll be selecting the housing estate itself to progress the project. So that's, I suppose, the project in a nutshell. If you have any comments or questions, you can put your questions in the comment section, and then I'll do my best to make sure that I can answer all the questions that are being asked. Okay, so the question that we have here, so realistically, if an estate is under the control of the developer, is there much chance of getting chosen? Yes, it is. Like I say, it's not to say that it can't be chosen, but I suppose the housing estate that are maintained by the council will score slightly higher on that particular scoring point. But again, like we kind of also look at opportunities, or in terms of like what is the likelihood of getting a lot of biodiversity gain? And I suppose we'll judge that by looking at the estate where it's located. So if there good opportunities there, like then we certainly will consider the even if it's under the control of the developer. Because again, like if there's good potential for connectivity in the surrounding areas and therefore colonization of an housing estate by whether it's particular bird species or bat species or whatever, because it has a higher likelihood of success. So yes, it can certainly be considered. So one of the other questions as well that we got previously was in terms of like, does a resident association have to apply? Because we don't have a resident association. I think the main thing to consider is that I suppose as a resident association, you don't need a bank account because we will not be paying a resident association. You also don't need to be registered with the PPN. But what we do, I suppose, asking for a resident association is basically that there's a sort of an organized structure there. Basically with a chair and a secretary and some sort of contact list of residents, basically, because the idea is that we would not be so much dealing with individual residents. Any correspondence is to go through the resident association, because that makes it easy for us to manage that instead of dealing with individual residents in a housing estate. So I suppose we don't try to make it too onerous, but there has to be some sort of coordinating structure there at local resident level. Okay. Another question here: we are a relatively new estate, and there aren't many front gardens, but there are open spaces. Will we still be considered? No, absolutely. The front garden element is just an optional one. I suppose our primary focus is on the open space. It is just that we kind of felt that there might be great opportunities as well in front gardens and sometimes even back gardens, just to see what could be achieved in those as well and what the effects of those are. Again, there's plenty of research out there at the moment that gardens actually support quite a wide range of insect life in particular. So I suppose we kind of want to see if we can pick up on that as well. So like I said, there's no problem if there's no front gardens, because it might well be that there's very little interest, for example, for front garden makeovers anyway, and that's fine. I suppose the primary focus will always be on the open space. We have another question here, and if there are plans for building works adjacent to our estate, would this have a negative impact on your decision? No, because we take it like particularly just per estate. So not like the building next door, that doesn't matter. It's very much kind of look at what potential does the existing estate have in terms of wildlife enhancement. So I suppose we take that as almost like a blank canvas, and we're not so much considering what happens in the surrounding areas. Then we have another question here: is a private housing estate whose green is maintained by FCC eligible? Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, because if it's maintained by FCC, then yes, it's certainly eligible. Yeah. And I have another one here: if only part of the open space can be made available for this, can it enter? Again, yes, it's certainly possible, but again, it will score slightly lower. Like ideally, again, we take the whole open space and kind of look at it holistically, but that's not to say that the rest of the open space will be completely for biodiversity, because the whole idea, I suppose, again, would be that you need your kickabout areas. You kind of need to look at the overall recreational use of the open space, and still need to cater for that as well. So the idea, I suppose, the idea that you design for the entire open space and just to kind of see what sort of opportunities there are for it. So again, if only like a small part of it gets set aside for it, that will score lower than, I suppose, if the entire open space gets put forward for this. And then there's another question here: so is there a set budget for this project? What is the scale of these interventions? Now, this is very much dependent on what the residents, I suppose, are looking for, because at the moment we don't know. Like, we have set aside quite a substantial sum for this, because like there might be interventions that will cost more money. But I think that the first thing that we need to do is very much kind of meet with the residents and the landscape architect to kind of do up a design that everybody is happy with. And I think that's like, and then the idea, like say, like if we, for example, if there might be opportunities, say for plants, say rainwater planters, for example, that would be more expensive than buying some trees. but at the same time we want to try those things, so we will make money available for those type of measures. Similarly, like the grass maintenance is relatively straightforward as well. Again, it's not very expensive. Planting is not expensive, but for example, decoupling some of the surface water drainage into a wetland, that would be more expensive, and it takes more design work. But again, it may not necessarily be appropriate for the estate. So these are also the things that we kind of want to work with the residents to kind of for them to decide sort of measures that they're happy with. Another question here then, if not successful, can we still ask for your help in developing biodiversity in our estate? Yes, I suppose that we certainly can always provide advice, but I suppose it's just to note that we will focus on those 3 estates in terms of overall time that we have available to kind of like undertake sort of a project or initiative of this scale. Because I suppose we'll like in terms of implementing biodiversity measures, we'll very much focus at the 3 estates and not so much elsewhere. So yeah, could restoring a watercourse be incorporated? Yes, that would be, because again, the biodiversity gain associated with it tends to be quite big. So if there's opportunities for watercourse restoration, then that is absolutely a possibility. Yes. Okay, another question here. Can you comment on what the reason is for the short deadline? Same for everyone, but it's very unrealistic given consultation with residents is a feature. Now, the reason, I suppose, why we did it this way, and also why we actually kept our application form actually relatively short, is more just to kind of get some idea, I suppose, what people feel about this. Because I guess some people say, well, we have to set up a residents association. Again, I suppose what we're kind of looking for is for residents to kind of come together, and they can literally just select a chair and a secretary, and as long as they have contact details, they have effectively a resident association. That could be even just a green that is opposite your house. So because again, like if for example you have a situation where like there's a group of residents around a green, they are like any changes we make on the open space right in front of the house, they will be mainly affected by that. So again, if there's a resident association or group of residents basically that for that estate, for that particular green, that's fine too. And again, as I said, we're not looking for official structures, but as long as there's some sort of thought given as to how that will be coordinated among the local residents itself. So there's a chair, there's a secretary, and there's I suppose like there's a WhatsApp group or email group or whatever, that you have a way of communicating with the residents. So and I suppose the idea then is that, because it takes a bit of time, because we want to get a consultation done with the local residents. So the idea is like we will announce it in May, and on the 3rd week in May or 2nd week in May, which estates have been selected. The idea then is to kind of set up the consultation workshop with local residents before the summer holidays. And like that, I suppose the idea behind that is that we can kind of get a design done and start pricing that with a view then where we can come back then after the summer holidays when a lot of people will be gone, or at least like they may not be available all the time. So we can come back then in September to the local residents like, well, here we've priced up everything now, and these are sort of the plans that we have for your housing estate. So because it just means we can order trees, we can order materials and everything, and that does take a bit of time to organize that. So that's why I suppose we're kind of looking at a relatively short time, but it was still a month though. I know it's 2 weeks from now, but it was announced about 2 weeks ago. So I suppose what we would like to do is just for people to kind of fill in the application form. It is relatively short, and if there's any trouble or any other questions or comments, I mean, you can always email biodiversity@fingal.ie. Like if you need any clarification or anything like that, because like I say, like any question here, like we're certainly willing to answer, or kind of if we can help in any way, that would be fine too. We have another question here then. We have quite a large estate. If chosen, will FCC maintain the estate while other initiatives are going on? Okay, I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what that question means. Does this relate maybe to I'm not sure. Maybe Mr. Hawkins, if you wouldn't mind just kind of asking that question in a slightly different way, because I'm not entirely sure what it means. Okay, we have a mature large green area with loads of different elements. And would the ideal candidate have a newer unlaid scape area to start from scratch, or do we apply with the angle of always having room for improvement for biodiversity? Yeah, again, like it could well be like we're not distinguishing too much between existing and like also say sort of mature, more mature estates or newer ones. Again, because I suppose both of them have there's biodiversity potential in both of those. Sometimes with the older estates, like there might be more wildlife in that already, and also offers better potential. But again, we take it on a case by case basis. And on itself, yes, if you have already like a large green area with lots of different elements, it's like that there's a lot of biodiversity already, but it also means there might be great potential for even more biodiversity enhancement, because you might have species already that can literally, I suppose, can expand from where they are at the moment. So yeah, like it doesn't matter whether it's unlandscaped or really landscaped. Again, we consider both, and in terms of the scoring, whether it's new or not, again, we really look at the potential that the site has. And that, like, you could have an unlandscaped area that has great potential and a really mature area that has very little if it's sort of enclosed by houses on all sides. But it might at the same time, it might well be the case that the more mature estate is also closer to, say, to other ecological corridors in the area, and therefore also has high potential. So again, the idea is like, by all means, just kind of apply for it, and then we can kind of look at the biodiversity potential then for the estate. Okay, so there's another question here as well. If funding has been allocated by Fingal already for the estate, will this impact the assessment for the process? No, it shouldn't. I'm not sure, like, I suppose in this case, whether it is different type of funding, because biodiversity funding wouldn't necessarily be already allocated to the estate. So no, it doesn't. Like, I suppose we do this project, like I said, like if there's another initiative already, doesn't matter. I suppose we have to be aware of what that is, because particularly if it's taking place on the open space, we do need to be aware of that in terms of planning for, I suppose, the biodiversity makeover. But it doesn't matter from that, like like there's no particular impact on that. Like, I suppose we can still do the biodiversity makeover one way or the other. Then we have another question here, like, unfortunately we have ash dieback in many areas of our estate. Can this program help with tree planting? Yes, it certainly can. This is a problem all over the county, and we do kind of take, I suppose, quite a cautious approach in terms of felling of trees. We do know that some trees, particularly older trees, do tend to survive for quite a long time. But I suppose, like, if they actually have succumbed to ash dieback and, like, I suppose they're dead trees, then it's often that we actually just take them down. But in this case, it might actually provide, say, for the timber, say, for a dead wood element of the open space, so we can reuse the material locally, basically. And then we have another question: will grass cutting and maintenance of the estate be maintained? Yeah, so, like, I suppose we're kind of like, if in the open space, like it could be sort of like as part of one big open space, or if there's smaller open spaces. But the whole idea basis, the areas that have been identified for meadows, our section of the council will look after that, while operations will keep on cutting the grass basically everywhere else. So, like, it's not that, like, oh, now we stop cutting that. That's not the way it works, because, say, like with the kickabout areas, they need to be maintained. So that the edges of the green, they need to be maintained. Whatever more pathways are there have to be maintained. So it's not that we stop cutting the grass, but it's only the certain areas where we allow the grass to grow, and then we basically get a contractor to harvest the hay then later in the summer or later in the autumn. Okay. So is there any other questions that you want to pose? Okay, and there's no new questions coming in. Okay, well, I'll leave it at that in that case. As I said, like, you can visit, there's the link is indicated here below in terms of Fingal Biodiversity Makeover Housing Estates in Fingal. And as I said, if you have any other questions that you forgot to ask today, by all means, you can also you can just email biodiversity@fingal.ie. So that's just like if there's any other questions that you didn't think of before. Or it's just a quick question here. You mentioned incorporating art. Can these pieces be prepared by residents? Yes, absolutely. I suppose again, like a hands-on approach on this, whether it's with tree planting or creating other features, that's exactly what we were looking for. So yes, that is certainly possible. Yeah, like if the idea, I suppose, is that we were looking for like sort of an ownership. So that's why I suppose the residents help to design it, and if there's opportunities to help build it, even better. But as I say, like otherwise, we'll kind of get contractors in to do some of that work. It's very much up to the residents, I suppose, what level of engagement they like to see. Okay, we have another question here. Could I ask who the appointed landscape architect will be? We have a landscape architect living in the estate. Could he be some help in some way? That might well be possible, yes. But I suppose what we tend to do, because we have to procure this, there's government procurement rules for these things. So we like there's various landscape architects that we have worked with over the last years that sort of have quite a good biodiversity angle or good understanding of biodiversity. So we'll be asking them to see to kind of get prices from them to do some of the design work with us. But that is not to say, like, if you have someone locally that also has a really good knowledge of these things, like, we're certainly very willing to work with that person as well. Okay. Well, so there's another question here. Why are council estates favored? Well, the reason for that, I suppose, is because the council, I suppose, controls the open space. So investment, I suppose, where if you kind of compare it with a private estate, it's council investment goes onto council property. So that's why I suppose it scores higher. It's not to say, like, so some of the private estates that I know of certainly offer great opportunities as well. But I suppose it scores slightly higher if it's on council property compared, say, to a private estate. That's the only reason. And I suppose it's still with the developer. It could be with the developer because there's still a maintenance period or there's still some outstanding issues. So again, we have to take, like, again, we will certainly consider them, but we just have to see how that fits in with planning compliance as well. So again, that's why the council owned or council maintained estates score slightly higher than the other options. Okay. I think that's all the questions answered in that case then. So I will leave it at this. As I said, biodiversity@fingal.ie. If you have any other questions that you didn't get to ask tonight, and like we can certainly help you with anything else as well. Okay. We'll leave it at that then. Thank you very much.